Week 1 was a wild one, but luckily we have Michael Fabiano, SI Senior Fantasy Analyst, here to help us make the best start-sit decisions as we head into Week 2. Okay, Fabiano, who are we starting this weekend at the quarterback position?
I'm going to start off with Trevor Lawrence. I know it's a little bit of low-hanging fruit, but there are players out there who might have a couple of quarterbacks that they can play the matchups with. And Lawrence has got a great matchup this week against Kansas City. Their defense has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks since the start of last year. And this should be a high-scoring game. The over-under right now is 51 in Vegas. And then Jared Goff, he's at home, which means you start him. On the road, you sit him. I mean, this is easy, right? It's easy money, too, if you're playing props for touchdown passes. 23 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions at home last year. And Seattle just gave up 334 passing yards to Matthew Stafford, so Goff is a very good play.
You mentioned the highest game total in Vegas this weekend and at SI Sportsbook this weekend, but what about some of the games with the lowest game totals? Are there quarterbacks you would sit from those matchups?
I'm sitting Dak Prescott, and this shows you that I am not unbiased because, hey, I know I'm a big-time Cowboys honk, but that Jets defense is good. I mean, they just held Josh Allen to 9 points, and they turned him over 4 times. And sorry, but Josh Allen is a lot better than Dak Prescott from a fantasy perspective. I'm keeping Dak on the bench. And this one might surprise you. It's more of a beware than a true sit. But Anthony Richardson, I get it. He had a really good game last week. I understand he's a mobile quarterback. That's a big help. But did you know, Jen, that the Texans defense has allowed the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks since the start of last year? And they just held Lamar Jackson to 6.6 points. So the Texans defense, at least against quarterbacks, is pretty tough. So I would not be surprised if Richardson maybe took a statistical step back this weekend.
I like that, Colin. Speaking of the Jets defense being good, just the Dallas defense is pretty good too, but that's neither here nor there. Let's go on to the running back position. Who are we firing up in our lineups this weekend?
I like David Montgomery, who led Detroit's backfield in snaps and touches and fantasy points last week. He's got a really good matchup, too, against the Seahawks, who have been really bad against the run. This is a defense that gave up 3 touchdowns to the Rams backs last week. So David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs should both be in your lineup. And then Rachaad White. Now, I get it. Last week, the numbers weren't great, but the snaps were there. He played 54 snaps. The volume was there. He had 19 touches. And the Bears, well, they've allowed 25 touchdowns and the 2nd most fantasy points to running back since last year. So I think Rachaad White bounces back.
I like that. And speaking of those Rams running backs, you say don't trust Cam Akers.
He burned us all last week. Actually, with Sean McVay. He just hates our fantasy teams, and I guess he doesn't like Cam Akers very much. Even though Akers started and he got a boatload of carries, a lot of those carries came in the 4th quarter. And it was really Kyron Williams. He had 53 snaps. Akers only played 28 snaps. And Niners, by the way, this is the toughest matchup for any running back on the week. So sit Akers and beware Kyron Williams as well. I'm also going to fade Javonte Williams, or I guess flex him at best. This is not a good matchup against the Commanders. Their defense has allowed the 2nd fewest PPR points to running back since the start of last year. And Javonte Williams basically split the snaps and the touches pretty closely with Samaje Perine last week.
At the wideout position, who gets the nod this weekend?
Let's start off with Tyler Lockett. Now, he did have a concussion, so make sure you check his status going into week 2. But if he plays, I'm going to start him, even though he had a massive stink bomb last week. But that's kind of Tyler Lockett. 1 week good, 1 week bad. He's got the Lions this week. They have been awful against wide receivers. 3rd most points allowed to the receivers since last year, including the most points to slot receivers. If Lockett can't go, DK Metcalf, obviously, and Jackson Smith and Jigba would become very good plays. And also Mike Williams. And Mike Williams did not have a great line last week. I get it, even though it was a high-scoring game. But the Titans' defense is terrible. I mean, they have given up 16 touchdowns and the 2nd most points to perimeter receivers since last year. And overall, no team has allowed more fantasy points to wide receivers. So as good as Tennessee is against the run, they're really bad against the pass.
I like that call. I like it a lot. Okay, wide receiver sit, someone who was actually on your start list last week, but there are a lot of questions about how they're going to use these talented players they have in Atlanta. And I imagine that's what you're going to say about Drake London.
Boy, I mean, was I left with egg on my face with Drake London? I mean, nothing. 0. Bupkis. the same amount of points as you and I scored last week. And now I'm a little bit worried because they ran the ball so much. I mean, they threw it 18 times, and now they've got the Packers, which means that Jair Alexander is going to get a lot of Drake London, and that's not good for Drake. This week, we hate the Drake. Let's hope he does not put up a good stat line because a lot of people will be benching him. And then Terry McLaurin, who last week actually played a full complement of snaps. He had 63 offensive snaps, so that toe injury seems to be a thing of the past, but he did not put up a good stat line, and he's got a bad matchup against the Broncos this week. They've allowed just 6 touchdowns and the 4th fewest points to perimeter receivers since the start of last year. If you do start McLaurin, he's a flex, and temper your expectations.
Certainly feels like the tight end position, if you paid up and drafted one early, so far it's only been 1 week, but that hasn't really paid off. You've got some guys on your start list that may even still be on a waiver wire, so who you got?
Tight end is impossible to predict. I mean, unless you have Travis Kelce or one of the high-end guys, and even those guys didn't produce this past week. But I'm going with David Njoku. He's playing on Monday night against the Steelers, and he has had success against Pittsburgh. In his last 3 games, he has scored at least 12.8 points in every single game. This has nothing to do with the matchup. It's just a trend of Njoku finding success against Pittsburgh because tight end is a mess right now. And then I'm going Zach Ertz. You know, Zach Ertz led all tight ends in the league in targets last week with 10. Like, that's a lot for a tight end coming off of a knee injury. So it seems like he's good to go. He's got the Giants this week. Did you know that in his last 9 games against New York, Ertz has averaged almost 18 points per game, and he's a security blanket of sorts for Joshua Dobbs. So if you need a tight end this week, you can maybe pick up Ertz and start him against the G-Men.
I love that call. Not only that, but Ertz averaged more than 11 fantasy points per game last season when he played, and he's sitting right there on the waiver wire. So I back that call. Go pick him up. But who are we sitting? I think we're sitting somebody that if you was picked up last week on the waiver wire.
Yeah, we're going to start off with Kyle Pitts, though. He's going to live in the sit-ems until he wakes up, and I don't know that he will, and it's not his fault. It's the offense. Like, I wish he got drafted by the Chargers, somebody who actually had a good quarterback that threw the ball effectively. But Pitts led the Falcons in receiving yards last week, and he had 2 catches. That's it. And like I said, Desmond Ridder, 18 pass attempts. That's it. All they do is run the ball. The Packers are tough on tight ends. I just don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for Kyle Pitts. And then, Tyler Higbee. And I loved Higbee last week, and he had a great matchup. And hello, Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell. You win some, you lose some. This week, he's got the Niners. Now, here's the trend on Higbee with the Niners. He has scored fewer than 9 fantasy points in all but 4 of 14 career games against them. So he does not have success against San Francisco. Let's just say that he has not been fantasy gold against the Niners. So I'm fading Tyler Higbee this week. I know it's a bad dad joke.
There we go, guys. There are the start sits for week 2. We wish you tons of luck in your fantasy football leagues, and don't forget to follow us at si.com/fantasy. We'll be back next week.